I had the absolute pleasure in being able to interview another successful property investor. This time it's Nicole Bremner. Now, she has been on the TV, she's got podcasts, she's written a book all about property investing, and she's got a large property portfolio and very successful. But what's nice about Nicole's interview with me is that she is so down to earth and she'll explain the highs and lows of being a property investor. So check out that video. And in this installment of interviewing successful property investors, I'm delighted and proud to have Nicole with me today. So let's get the show on the road. So Nicole, why don't you give your full name and a brief description of what you do?
Hi, Simon. Thank you very much for having me. I am Nicole Bremner, and it's very hard to describe what I do now because it's a bit of everything. But I think the overall term that I use now describing myself as an investor, I invest in property primarily, but my portfolio got a bit out of balance, shall we say, and it was too heavily weighted into property. So more recently, I've been diversifying into a couple of startup companies that have been varying degrees of success there. Also some equity investments, very limited there. That's something that I'm going to be increasing actually going forward. And then doing some non-exec type roles as well, which I'm really enjoying. Podcasting, TV presenting, speaking, and quite a bit of marketing strategy and consultancy as well. So quite a bit of everything, which is really nice. It's very varied and I'm enjoying all of it.
So in terms of, if we can go back in time, it's almost like kind of wobbly, wibbly, wobbly thing going on. In terms of going back in time, why did you get started in property? What was the main motivation for you?
So I'd worked in banking and finance for many years. I was the youngest ever chartered financial planner in Australia at 21, but I couldn't be chartered. I got the qualification, but I couldn't use the designation because I hadn't finished my degree. I did them parallel and finished the chartered financial planner first. And came over to the UK and realized that my qualification was completely redundant over here, or just obsolete. It didn't exist. I'd have to start all over again. I think I get 2 credits. So I had a look at some other things that I could do over here and started working in banking. Now, in around 2005, I decided that I'd like to try this entrepreneur thing. So I set up a couple of different businesses, and then my partner was transferred to the US. So I followed him over there, ended up having a baby and going back into banking at Goldman. And that was in 2008. And I started Goldman on the 14th of September 2008, which is the day that Lehman's collapsed.
Yeah.
And I felt like quite a part-timer anyway, because I had a 7-month-old baby. I was going in early, not as early as everyone else, late at 8 o'clock and finishing at 6. And I could just see that everyone was thinking I was a part-timer. And I knew that I'd have to do something for myself. I wouldn't be able to go back into banking. We moved back to London, found out I was pregnant again, started looking for things that I could do. And I tried so many different things. But at that time also, before we went away to the US, I bought a flat in Clerkenwell that was our home, rented it out, came back, thought I'd give it a bit of a cosmetic refresh and put it on the market because it's a bit small now for 2 people and 2 babies. So I put it on the market and it doubled in price in less than 10 years. Wow. And I thought, wow, this flat has made more than I have. And I worked at Goldman. So what are we going to do about this? There has to be an opportunity. And so that's when I found another dilapidated vicarage in Hackney that it was before Hackney became cool. Bought that was back in 2009, renovated that, loved the process, did a flat in Austria as well, loved that process. So I thought there has to be something in this. I'm thoroughly enjoying the process. I find I can call on my financial modeling skills as far as Excel and accounting, and I can also channel some of the creativity that I love so much. So started just buying what I now know are HMOs. At the time, I thought they were bed sits. Started buying up bed sits in Hackney and renovating them into luxury family homes. And I just really, really enjoyed that. And fortunately for me, I managed to ride the wave of Hackney from 2010 through to 2015, 16. And I was very fortunate to ride that. Unfortunately, then the government decided that they didn't want smaller landlords or developers, and the tide turned, shall we say.
So in terms of, did you used to keep hold of all of your properties, or did you sell your properties? If you used to trying to put a hat on, which one would you lean towards, property developer or property investor?
It was definitely property developer back then. The idea was always to sell, and even the way that we structured the holding companies and the SPVs underneath that was all set up just for buying, renovating, selling on very quickly. And
Right.
so it was done very strategically for that. When the markets now changed, obviously we've had to change strategy along with that. And also my requirements changed. Back then I had no need for a cash flow, but as life has moved on, my focus now with my investments is cash flow, and so we've had to adjust the strategy now.
Right. And which one do you prefer?
I love renovating. And even now, when I look at what I'm going to do when I grow up and look at the next phase of my career, I kind of think that careers fall in sort of 10-year blocks, don't they? And I feel like I had my 10 years in banking, my 10 years in property, and it's now, okay, what's the next 10 years hold for me now that I'm 41? And what I really enjoyed is taking these old tired houses that had been loved as family homes for decades, and the houses I was buying had been in the same families for decades, and then just breathing life into them and making them incredibly beautiful and modern, and then selling them on to people who genuinely loved them and fell in love with them, and just taking such care over all the details and making them homes that I would want to live in with my family. And that really is what I loved. And now as I've changed what I do and doing more larger developments with flats, we've got 47 flats in Luton and another dozens of flats in single developments that we're doing across Hackney. I don't have the same passion for that as I do for creating these beautiful family homes.
To be fair, the reason I asked that question was because I saw you at Matt Siddell's event, and you talked about business, and you kind of said, I'm not really a business person. And I thought it was really interesting. You kind of echoed that point. But then you show the slides of what you do from a creative aspect. And straight away, your whole body, your whole personality just jumped out. And it was just so lovely to watch someone passionate and animated about what you do. So it was a kind of a poised question, because I knew the answer was you're very much into the creative stuff, and you did some beautiful properties, I have to say, far beyond what I tend to get involved with. But it's always great to see people enthusiastic. In terms of the situations, the ups and downs of life, and in business in particular, what's kept you going through the kind of the down periods in terms of business, property investing, developing? What's been the key driver for you to say, no, every day, got to get up? What's that thing?
I think at the moment it's recovering capital. I've got a significant amount of my own capital as well as investors tied up in these projects. And if they don't get completed, then we don't get our money back. If we don't sell these units or refinance out and restructure them, we don't get our money back. And that's, I think that so many people go into property when the market's rising, myself as well, and think this is easy, this is a great industry, you get double-digit returns. If they really analyze their returns, and you would know this from experience working with clients, if they would really analyze their true returns, factoring in time, internal rates of return, their full costs, not just construction costs, but their full costs, I doubt any of them are even beating the equity markets. I think a good tracker fund would probably outperform most property developers. And I'd like anyone who can demonstrate 10 years of solid evidence that disputes that, because I don't think it exists.
No, and just to echo that point, I used to say to some clients that you produce sets of accounts, and I used to say to them, "Do you know what? In all honesty, the current strategy that you're deploying, you are far better." And I said this in a nice way, so before any viewers say, "Oh, that's a bit harsh," but I said from the point of view of look at your profit and loss account, tell me how many hours that you did to generate this income and then work out the hourly rates, because I rather suspect that you could earn more money stacking shelves at Tesco. And that's because people don't look at the financials. I think what people do, they go to network events, do a property education seminar, and then follow what they think is right. But really, are they making enough money? And that's kind of something I've echoed. So it's nice to hear someone else say that, because I always feel that I'm almost a preacher to someone who doesn't want to listen. But do you see that a lot in terms of the networking that you do, that people aren't making as much money as they probably should do because of the lack of attention to detail?
I think that now, with the markets the way they are, and even this is I'll talk about pre-COVID-19. So even the earlier months, late 2019 to early 2020, so many people, so many developers were contacting me going, "Oh my goodness, if I don't refinance this deal, or if I don't change the way I'm doing everything, I will lose it all." And things were, prior to this pandemic, things were very, very tough for people. And I think that there are not enough people who are being open about this, how hard it is. And only talking about the easy wins. Yeah, I could sit down at a networking event now and say, I made X amount on that one. We did 56% return on this one. We did this. That's fine. But what about the whole portfolio? That's just say 2 or 3. And if I then factor in everything we've done over, it's a different picture, because yeah, there are going to be deals that we will lose money on. And it's just about people being more transparent about that. And what I say to people now is, if you were to take this to your accountant or your lawyer or your financial advisor, and if they would say no, would you actually listen to them? Or would you be so determined to do this, you'd just hold your hands over your ears and just continue on with it anyway? And I think most of them would. And I know I would. When I was analyzing these projects in 2016, 17, I would do a best, mid, and worst case. But what I wouldn't realize is that my worst case, that was going to be my best case. And
Yeah.
so, and I didn't care if an accountant or a trusted advisor said, actually, I'm not really comfortable with these numbers. I think that you need to dial them down a bit. I would have said, no. Look at my history. Look at how we've done this over the last 6 years. We're fine. We're going to do well on these. And it just takes someone. I just don't think people want to hear bad news, quite frankly.
No. And in terms of that decision making, and we're talking about people that you meet, some are successful, some are not as successful. But in the majority case, do you think people use their brain to make a logical decision, or their heart to make an emotional decision?
I think you can logic out any decision, and even ones that perhaps if you really sat and thought about and tried to dig into that gut instinct, you can logic around it anyway. And people do this all the time about all sorts of decisions. So I just think that I had a very good discussion with my friend James. He is a gaming writer, sports writer. So he writes on sports betting. And we sat down and discussed the qualities that are inherent in a professional gambler as well as a professional property investor or developer. And there are many parallel qualities in these people. The glass is always half full. They always go with the best case scenario. Just the way that they're eternal optimists. And I'm not advocating that people become more negative, but just to be a little bit more realistic and realize that there's a reason why Tony Pidgley of Berkeley Homes, why he is consistently getting a 7 to 10% return. That's because he has decades of experience and a finely oiled machine, and the ability to purchase not just land on a bulk price and all, but also in materials, labor. He's just got such powers of negotiation. Anyone that thinks that they can outdo him are deluding themselves and need a dose of reality, I think.
That's a very valid point. And we talked about COVID-19. Obviously, the property world of investing and developing will change because of COVID-19 one way or another. What areas, we talk about opportunities here, but what are the opportunities that you see after COVID-19 has gone away?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that the opportunities are always those with cash. Cash is always king. And if you've kept your powder dry, your war chest stocked, all of those phrases, if you have, then there's going to be the opportunity to pick up some absolute bargains, because unfortunately, what was the latest statistics that came out yesterday? However many, 4 out of 5 small businesses will go out of business. I can't remember the exact statistic now. I try and block that. Yeah. But this includes people who sell any widget, and property just happens to be another widget, if you're looking in that sense of the words. So if you have cash available to you and management systems in place to take on these various properties as they come about, whether they be partially constructed or tenanted, a whole block of properties which are tenanted, if you've got these solid processes in place and cash, then there's a huge amount of opportunity. Even last year, I was talking to a large landowner and a very, very large developer who their family have been investing since the 16th century. They own thousands of properties and they're very under the radar. And we were talking about doing a recovery fund, as I was calling it, together. And the conversations kind of stopped as of early this year and will be hopefully picked up again. But the idea is to invest in these, because not only is it an opportunity to make money, but it's also an opportunity to try and help people with the housing crisis and try and get some of these houses built so that people have homes, and also get people back in employment, because there's a lot of skilled labor sitting there at home going absolutely stir crazy, not being able to pay the bills, when if we've got some really well capitalized investors who can go and take these properties and continue on with the construction once we're able, or manage them properly, then they'll be the winners. As far as specific, I think there's going to be a much greater emphasis going forward on healthcare, I believe, as a result of this. I'm sort of thinking on the top of my head, I wonder, and this will be one that will happen in a decade from now, but I wonder if this COVID crisis will do for careers what things like Ellie McBeal and Law and Order did for law, and that we had this glut of people who went through law school because of Law and Order and Ellie McBeal and various shows. And I'm hoping, because my family are medics, my 4 parents and step parents, they're all medics, and I'm hoping that we now have this oversupply almost of medically trained people, whether they be doctors or nurses or other theatre staff, to step in should this be something that is more frequent, these kind of pandemics. So I think we'll see a lot more of our children saying, hey, I want to be a doctor, or I want to be a nurse, which are very honourable professions.
It is. To be honest, I agree with you. The NHS have been downtrodden for a period of time, and Dr. Shan Hussein, who's a big shout out to him, he does a podcast for NHS. So he's a doctor himself, but he talks about the state of the NHS and how it's not supporting its doctors properly. And this is way before COVID-19 took place. So I echo that. I'm a volunteer for the NHS into the business processes, but also for the recent COVID-19 as well, distribution drugs and stuff to hospitals. So no, I absolutely agree. I'm hoping that there'll be a lot of doctors and nurses out there that is a frightening subject because they're not protected with PPE at all. And there's a lot of death now we're seeing in Italy, Spain, and the UK. So our hearts and minds goes out to those people, and hope they can pull through as much as anything else.
Absolutely.
In terms of the talking about the final key lesson, if there are one or two things that are listening to you today, thinking, "Wow, all these properties, I can't get there." What bits of sound advice could you give to those guys who are starting out as a property developer or a property investor? And let's think about post-COVID-19.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that I'm probably being overly pessimistic. Obviously, this is it's a brilliant industry that I have thoroughly enjoyed being part of for the next 10 years. And I believe it will still be in my future for the next 10 years. How that looks, I'm not quite sure yet, as we all need to get through the next few months. But there are always opportunities for good people. And especially if you've got cash behind you or a skill, if you are on the tools, then there's so many opportunities for you once we start growing. And if you talk to any investor who's been doing this for decades, they'll always tell you that the times that they made money are out of downturns. So as we rebuild the economy, you look at even historically, look at what happened in Germany after the war, when they didn't have enough workers, so they had the people from Southern Europe coming up to fill those roles, and Germany boomed, and that was despite the reunification and all the issues around that. So, and the same thing has happened. Look at the finance industry post the dot-com bubble bursting, and then the world financial crisis. So out of all of these things, we have these contractions, and then we have this growth, and that is going to happen again. The world always looks different after one of these crises, and it's about trying to get an understanding of how this is going to impact us and what parts of the economy are going to be impacted irreparably, because there are always things that change. So I think now's a good time to get education, and a really good professional education can never be overlooked. Things like an RIBA, one of the quantity surveying type qualifications, or not RIBA, sorry, who is it that do all the qualifications? I forgot, the quantity surveyors and things.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
yes.
They do a really good quantity surveyor, or these types of qualifications. As you know, RICS, yes, not RIBA, yeah. RICS. RIBA's architects. But as you know, if you have a profession, you're always going to have something that is a backstop in your life. And so that would be my advice to people, is really, if you are interested in getting into property, go and do a RICS qualification, or at least start that process and start getting yourself familiar, because once we are in this recovery phase, then your skills are going to be very much needed. But yeah, so if you don't have the skills, go get the skills. If you've got some cash, start learning about the areas that you might like to invest in, and things that really interest you, whether it be hotels, or whether it be single family homes, or flat developments, apartments, those sorts of things, or if it's aged care or whatever it might be. There are so many different micro niches within property. And then my final bit of advice would be, get an accountant. You're a good accountant that understands property, not just your regular accountant that might do your tax return, but a specialist accountant, or a financial advisor who specializes in property, or a lawyer. Ideally all three, because all three will work very closely together and assist you on all aspects of the legal and finance and tax and structuring. So I would just highly recommend that people do that. That's my three takeaways from.
I think that's brilliant advice. Now, obviously, I'm not going to say how do people contact you on email or mobile. I'm not going to do that because you're bombarded. But have you written anything about property that people can be referenced to, and I can drop a link below this video for people to learn more about from what you've talked about?
Yeah, sure. I wrote a book called Bricking It: From Stay-at-Home Mother to Millions in Property. probably a bit out of date now, given what's going on. And so I'm now writing my next book, which is called How to Lose Millions in Property. So complete change. Exactly. That was the optimistic me as the market rose. And now this is the more, I won't say pessimistic, the real me as the market contracts, and just about how people need to be much more careful and only trust their trusted advisors and professionals.
Sure. So I can drop a link on the Bricking It, but
Yes.
If anything, can I put a link to your LinkedIn profile so people can
LinkedIn would be perfect. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll do that, because then anyone watching this, waiting for that new book, which is going to be released when?
Oh, I don't know. I've got to write it. That's one of my goals. That and learn the guitar. I know. Well, I started the author accountability page or group on Facebook, and that really is a way of me being accountable. And I've bought my Post-it notes. This is this method that I use for mapping out books. So I've got my Post-it notes ready to map it out, and my goal is by tomorrow to have my book mapped out, and my accountability group is keeping me to that. And there are actually 50 people, I think 50 people who have joined the author accountability book. So it just shows there's so many people who want to use this opportunity, this time of isolation to bring out their inner book.
Yes, I've been challenged. I might have to join that group, because I've been challenged to write a book about accounts and tax. But I kind of think tax, how can you write an interesting book about tax? So I'm going to have to think about maybe a different format. But thank you ever so much, Nicole, for today. It's been a real pleasure. And I will post the links to Bricking It. I appreciate you say it may be a bit out of date, but until the new book comes out, let's share our knowledge out there. And again, I'll put the link for LinkedIn profile for Nicole as well. So Nicole, thank you ever so much today.
Thank you, Simon.
Well, why not book a call with me, Simon Misiewicz, your Finance Tax Director, for at least an hour to understand how we can help you grow your business without paying the tax.